Today I had a great opportunity to interview Representative Adam Byrd. Adam Byrd represents the eastern part of Claremont County and the western part of Brown County.
It's the fancy journalism.
Look at that! Look at the you get all the. It's amazing what you can do with Amazon today. Okay, so I am sitting here with Representative Adam Byrd, which I truly appreciate. Adam's a stand-up guy. I think you're a real conservative. You've done, I think, a good job. You know, I grade all politicians on a curve, so as you know, but I think you've done a good job. And I told Adam that Brown County Party Chair Nick Owens tells me nothing but good things about Adam Byrd. So you've agreed to do a little sit-down interview. I sent you a list of topics to talk about and to hit on. We can go in any order. Do you have any preferences?
Fire away.
If you want to add anything. So one of the things I think is a big controversy going on in your district is Batavia Village, the CRAs, the incentives. So I want to explore that a little bit and get your views on, and I know you have a bill, is it 113? 113, Bill 113?
I don't remember all the numbers.
Adam's legislative assistant is sitting off camera, so every time he turns there, you know who really runs the operation. So 113, I think it is, and so just when and I'm familiar with TIFs, JEDs, I'm pretty familiar with CRAs because I've looked into them. I know you have legislation on the matters. And so let me kind of start with, as a legislator, the legislation, Ohio the legislature puts in place laws for certain kind of incentives and allows certain kind of incentives like TIFs, JEDs, CRAs. So before we get into the details of them, in your mind as a representative, what makes for good and bad economic development incentives?
Well, I think it's important that as a state legislature, we're business friendly. We want to make sure that we are creating an environment where people want to move to Ohio, people want to grow a family in Ohio, and so when it comes to regulations, we don't want to be overly burdensome. Certainly, we also want to make sure that we're not costing the taxpayers. And so I'll give you an example. A lot of people have been critical of the House passed version regarding the Cleveland Browns. And so, that's a new development. If it were to be built, that is, 1/6 of it would be based on the selling of bonds. And so no general revenue dollars. And so, I would have felt uncomfortable had there been general revenue dollars in there. They also put up collateral for that. So that is, that's an example of us trying to incentivize business and growth in Ohio. We've also done that for Andrel. We've also done that.
But not to interrupt you, but when I get into things like specific incentives like TIFs, JEDs, CRAs,
yeah, let's talk
that
about
are not Cleveland Browns, that are like a township, a village, whatever, does a TIF or does a whatever in there. So just to not, make it too circular reference on the discussion, I once asked Ken Geis like years ago, because there was always so much controversy about jungle gyms and TIFs in my part of the county, what made for good and bad economic development incentives. And his answer, I kind of tattooed in my brain, let's hope I can say it back right, was those incentives that create a significant increase in property value that becomes taxable within a reasonable period of time, and or create significant jobs, and or fund public infrastructure that otherwise would not be able to be afforded, is good. Those things that don't, so just to characterize the difference, so he would have a view, this is from back then when I asked him about this, because it was when FC Cincinnati stuff was coming up in Milford. And he's like, so TQL, in his mind, good, because significant jobs, significant increase in property tax value, and infrastructure paid for that otherwise the township would not have been able to afford. FC Cincinnati, bad, no significant increase in jobs, no new infrastructure, whatever the third. So that's what I'm kind of getting at, is more practically, when you look at CRAs and these kind of things, do you have a philosophy as to what makes for good and bad economic development incentives?
Well, you used the word reasonable. The word reasonable, obviously, what's reasonable is in the eye of the beholder when it comes to that. And so I would not argue with all of that. But you're talking about an area that has a lot of CRAs, a lot of TIFs, the Union Township area, and to the
I don't know that the Union Township has CRAs.
well,
Yeah,
TIFs and economic
JEDs,
development
TIF and
tools
JEDs.
and so forth. And so that is definitely, too many of them maybe piled up on top of each other it would be a concern, but that's not my wheelhouse. You
Okay.
know, that's for, the county commissioners, the township trustees, the economic development department.
Okay.
Certainly, we've given them some tools to use, and they've used them, and whether they've been used to excess or not, that might be for someone else to judge. But
Okay.
regarding House Bill 113, this is a bill that seeks to return a little bit of balance to that situation. And right now, Type 2 annexation, expedited annexation, offers no ability for any other government entity to push back on the efforts. of
So that
another council.
annexation is a different topic than CRAs.
True.
So I think one of the parts of your bills in CRAs is that schools need to be made whole within a CRA.
The part of that bill that talks about CRAs gives a Board of Education the opportunity to veto that CRA. And so the reason that it's in there is just because I think that the way it's being used in Batavia is an example of being used wrongly to send what could be upwards of hundreds of kids to the school without property tax going to help pay for that, also to pay for emergency services. So those kinds of things are definitely a concern.
But in Batavia, that particular, and I don't know what the name of the housing development is, but there's the hot button one by the airport. And my understanding is, CRA is different than a TIF, but that there's already there's a thing within a CRA called an assessment, or today, and there's already a agreed to assessment to fully fund the schools. So in that particular case, I guess you could have somebody do a CRA and not do that, because I personally, from my Union Township experience on TIFs, because I've looked into, is the schools always got made whole on TIFs. People would cite a couple examples saying, oh, look, these weren't made whole, but those were there were two TIFs where instead of the school getting money, they got their offices at the Union Township Center, they got a building and they got their bus lot, was all provided by the township in lieu of them getting the money from that TIF. So it's kind of false to say the schools got somehow screwed in the deal, because they got probably more value than they would have got by their office space, a building by the Chamber of Commerce, at least one or two floors of that building. So were you aware that there's already an assessment in place that would already to make the schools whole? Now, there isn't, by the way, I've checked into it, there isn't for the fire department at this point. My understanding is that's not been worked out or even discussed, but the schools, there's already assessment to make them whole.
I'm not aware of any and all conversations that have occurred between the village of Batavia and Batavia schools. And
Okay.
So I'm not sure what's happened there.
Does your bill, the motivation of your bill, because it's very politically charged in our area, that development, are there other examples you can cite of the motivation of that bill that are other than the local issue that you're dealing with?
Sure. My joint sponsor in the bill is Representative Jonathan Newman, who represents Miami County, which is the rural county just north of Montgomery County. And the city of Huber Heights is annexing land across the county line into rural Miami County. And so he is he's very passionate about this.
But that's different than CRAs.
Well,
Annexation
that's
and
the part-
CRAs are two different
It's an
things.
annexation part, but this bill that you're referring to, House Bill 113, has both an annexation component to it and a CRA component to it.
So I want to maybe move on here, because I don't want to take up too much of your time. I know you're a busy guy. So when it comes to your philosophy on villages, okay? So at one time, as you know, again in your district, the controversial issue of Amelia, the dissolution of Amelia Village, that created a lot of consternation and a lot of issues because people didn't know how to do it, right? I guess there's a difference between a village that just dies out, like the other one, the other one that got voted out of existence.
Claremont County.
Yeah, but I'm trying to think of the name of it. It would have gone away within a couple years anyway, because it was financially insolvent.
Okay.
There's a difference between that, a situation like Amelia, where they actually, at the next census, would have become a city and then not be dissolvable. So I know you took a very big interest in it at that point in time with the chaos that it caused when a thriving area dissolves on a relative scale. And but I think then I would look at it as like you were looking at legislation. I'm not sure what all got implemented that would make it a little bit harder to dissolve villages. And now you're on legislation that would make it harder for villages to annex and become bigger. So are you bullish on villages growing into cities and municipalities? Or what do you think the role of villages is?
Well,
And by the way, I've been a proponent of mostly of dissolving villages, right? So it's not like I'm, a pro-village person, but I'm trying to get what your philosophy is as to how do you see villages fitting in governance in Ohio?
Yeah, well, the original intent of the bill that I did with Representative Schmidt a couple of years ago, which made it to the governor's desk, and he signed it, by the way, was not to make it harder or easier to dissolve a village. It was to bring clarity to how to dissolve a village, because there was a lot of multi-year consternation and lawsuits and so forth on how to dissolve a village. So that was the intent and purpose of that bill. Regarding the Batavia Village, this is something that I've been deluged with concern from village residents, from township residents, from people who care about the school, people who care about the airport. And I think that they believe that what is happening is wrong, not in the best interest of Claremont County, not in the best interest of that area. And so they're seeking some relief from that. And so the reason for the bill is that I believe that someone, a village councilman elected by 150 or 200 people, shouldn't have more power than a county commissioner elected by 40 or 50,000 people.
So on a type 2 annexation today, for example, and I'm not that well versed on them, okay, but a type 2 annexation I think is one of the core things. In today's world, if all the property owners in the type 2 annexation, the people that own the property want to be annexed, they all sign a petition to be annexed, the commissioners cannot stop the annexation. I think in your legislation would allow commissioners to stop an annexation when even all of the property owners in the area have signed that they want to be annexed. So that's not 150 people voting for a village council member. That's property owners that. So do you feel it's fair to be able to say that if property owners in an area, if they all 100% sign a petition that they want to be annexed, that the commissioners can stop them from being annexed?
Well, county commissioners want to make decisions that are in the best interest of their county. And I think that if a group of individuals who own that land go to the county commissioners and say, this is what we want, we think this is in our best interest, I think county commissioners would approve that. But again, local control, let them decide. But in this particular case, I don't think it was a group. It was one person who owned that land next to the airport. And so the airport's mad about it, the township's mad about it, the school's mad about it.
But doesn't that person have the right to say, this is my land, I want to be part of the village? If I want to do that, why should politicians be able to tell me I can't do with my land? I think the issue that people get concerned about is you have an inherent right to use your property for a legitimate purpose. There's zoning and all that kind of stuff. And one thing I think is actually a check and balance now is if Batavia Township is not amenable to working with certain kind of developers, and those developers are going to go to, if they have an option, I actually love our system of checks and balances, where you can be, a certain way up to a point, but the person might have another option. Owensville had a similar situation where there was, I guess, some farmland there. Stone Lake Township, that's your district, isn't it?
Nope.
Okay, so that's Gene's. But Stone Lake Township, just as an example, was basically fist-palming a developer that wanted to do something to land. The developer then let themselves be annexed by Owensville, so Owensville would let them do what they wanted to do. And I think that's actually a good thing to check and balance the system a little bit. But I don't want to go in. But I asked you the question, what's your philosophy as to how you see villages fitting in Ohio going forward? My view, my view is actually most of the villages we have in Ohio shouldn't even exist. Most of them we have in Claremont County shouldn't exist. That's my view. And that's not your view. I'm not saying what your view is, but how do you see that unit of government in a world in which townships, if you look at the biggest, most happening areas in Claremont County, not your district, well, I'm not saying district, but like Union and Miami Township and Pierce Township, those are so the need to create a village or a city is not great, because you can have big units of government that are just townships now, but you have this ancestral villages, like the village of Moscow, and, what do you see the role of villages going forward and in your philosophy? Should we be getting rid of them?
I think we should be letting local people decide. And they have the opportunity to dissolve their village. We did not change that ability. We just brought clarity to how to do it if the villagers decide. So, obviously, if you decide to live and go move to a village, that's on you. And there are benefits to that. There are also detriments to that, because you could be subject to a 1% income
Right.
tax, but at the same time, you could get better services or more
Right,
services.
right.
And I live in a township. I didn't want to live in a village, and it's forever each to.
Well, and I think that but I believe now in the law, the commissioners can force a vote on a village dissolution. So I think there's a test of 7 things, and I think it's 5 of 7 if the village isn't doing at least 5 of the 7, providing police services, providing this, providing that, and the police services would be they contract with the sheriff. That would count, but the commissioners can force it onto the ballot that there would be a vote on dissolving that village. In your district, this will put you on the spot, and you're probably going to say, I'm not going to answer that. Are there villages within your district that you think should be dissolved?
It's up to them to decide.
Do you
Not for me to
do you
decide.
think Batavia Village should be dissolved?
It's not for me to decide.
Do you think Moscow should be dissolved?
Not for me to decide. I know people who live in Moscow who love that village, love that place, and don't want it to dissolve. And it's on them. They can decide whether they want a village or not.
So I think one of the dilemmas is, so I think, there's a lot of those villages shouldn't exist. They've outlived their usefulness, they're high tax, they're depressed, and I kind of look at it from like an Elon Musky Doge type of thing. They're not delivering, their future would be better off in a different structure. That's my view, not your view. But your position is that in all cases, it's just, you don't have any position that there's any village within your district that you think should dissolve, that you would coach them to dissolve.
Absolutely not. It's on them to decide.
Okay, let me move on to, is there anything else about that incentives that you wanted to talk about, or that, because you have the legislation up now, I've hit everything I want to hit. Is there anything else you want to say about incentives? In the CRAs, I'm trying to get more educated on CRAs because I don't think Union Township uses CRAs, so I'm not familiar with them. As an aside, I understand that well, I'm not going to go there. I tried to understand what the distinctions were, but I'll probably screw it up, so I'm going to move on. I know that you have in the budget bill, I remember coming here years ago with Barry Woodruff, Commissioner in Brown County, part of your district, or part of your district, and Nick Owens and John Becker testifying on the Work Act that people need to be in the office more, elected officials. I think particularly talking about elected officials in county jobs that are meant to be full-time. Just for reference, there are jobs like school board and trustee that are not meant to be full-time jobs. They're meant to be oversight jobs. But when you get into like a county commissioner, so a lot of people know, I think at this point, or may not know, that for a lot of them, they only have to be in the office once, I think right now, every 90 days.
That's correct.
I believe treasurers and auditors, it got changed some years ago to at once every 30 days. And I believe you have legislation, I'll let you in the budget to change it to every 30 days for all of them, basically, or help me to.
Yeah, it's not my amendment. It's not, I voted yes on the budget, but inserted in there was one amendment was adopted into that budget to bring them all down to 30.
Okay.
And so, it's over in the Senate now. We'll see what they do with it.
And that's all, I would assume that doesn't include judges because they would have to be in the office anyway.
I don't believe it includes judges.
It's like your core things, auditor, auditor's already 30, but commissioners, et cetera, et cetera. So one of the things I think
I might add, though,
Yes.
that this, to me, we've got hardworking people in our county elected offices in Claremont and Brown. I don't think it'll affect them anyway.
So I don't think that maybe now, there was an era where it would have affected some of them, okay? So I think that there has become more focus on when you're getting a full-time salary as a county elected official. And I know it differs, like a commissioner in Claremont County is definitely getting a full-time salary if you were a commissioner in Brown County, I don't know what a commissioner gets paid in Brown County.
They're paid different levels.
Yeah,
depending
based on the
their
population. Yeah, so even I could admit you have some jobs where, like you say, a prominent attorney in the community becomes a commissioner, and they're still going to want to have their law practice because the commissioner job would be a massive pay cut for them, and whereas a big county like Claremont, it's a more full-time salary for sure, plus it's a more shit going on. It's the big county, the more stuff is going on. I think one of the things that's a consternation, I fully support that, by the way. I fully support, but I think one of the dilemmas is, what does it have to do with the budget? Is a lot of stuff gets thrown into the budget that doesn't seem to have anything to do with the budget, and that I personally believe kind of violates the never enforced single, what is that called? Single subject legislation. And I can't see how. I'm sitting here, I just did an interview with Phil Richter of the Ohio Election Commission. There's a move to get rid of the Ohio Election Commission. You could at least argue that had something to do with the budget because it would eliminate cost. But what does that have to do with the budget? And would it be better as a freestanding bill?
Well, I think that there's a lot of conversation around this all of the time, and some things get inserted into the budget that might not necessarily have something to do with finances, and
Okay.
has something to do with policy. And the General Assembly has been doing this for many decades, and sometimes we use that to insert policy in there, and
Okay.
I think it's the will of our caucus to continue to do that.
So philosophically, would you be for less of that, more of that, or it's about the right level?
Well, I certainly believe in transparency. I want to make sure that we're having hearings. I want to make sure that, what we're considering, people have
Okay.
a chance to weigh in on.
Because I think that there's also a difference, just to call a distinction between, say, a bill that's gone through a bunch of hearings that gets slammed into the budget to get it through, and a bill that's effectively what would have been a bill but never had any hearings.
Mm-hmm.
Has your thing, I know there was years ago the Work Act, the John Becker Work Act that was similar. Has your proposal had any hearings
Which proposal?
for the 30 days?
Yeah, that's not mine. That's just an amendment that was inserted in there.
Oh, I thought you had something to do with putting it in there.
Well, I mean, I serve on the Speaker's leadership team, and
Okay.
certainly we have those conversations. What was your question again?
What was that?
Did it have any hearings?
Yeah.
No, we didn't have any hearings on that, but it's
Okay.
been a big conversation.
I mean, I support the notion. I just personally am for that kind of stuff being standalone bills and having hearings, just to have the rigor. I mean, I oddly am against the ORP endorsing Vivek Ramaswamy right now because I generally, I always believe in no endorsements in primaries, or at least no endorsements before the filing deadline. So I just philosophically. So let me keep moving here. Ethics reporting, I believe, I don't know if it's in your bill or where it is, but I think it's in your bill. There's a thing about ethics reporting to require village administrators to file ethics finance reports.
That's true. It is in House Bill 113. And so as a superintendent, I had to do that.
Okay.
As a member of the state legislature, I
Okay.
have to do that. And because people in those kinds of positions have a lot of
I support it.
power, they should at least be able to file a financial disclosure statement with the Ethics Committee.
Yeah, I support it. And the financial disclosures are kind of, they're kind of there's not a lot on a financial disclosure. People that think you're disclosing all kind of things about your financial life, it's not really the case. It's a very simplistic form in my view. It's not a lot of detail that has to be disclosed. Do you know if that extends to, for example, township administrators, or is it specifically in your legislation for village administrators?
Village, cities, assistant.
So why not township? So Union Township has massively more money going through it, massively more complex. Why would you have a bill that has village administrators, other than the parochial issues going on in Batavia Village right now, village administrators, but not township administrators?
Well, we probably should consider that.
And then I appreciate that. And then, one thing that always peeves me is at least there's a name, I wrote it down here, there's a name for, the urban townships, so which means bigger, I don't know what the criteria is, but bigger, so Union Township, Miami Township are urban townships. I don't know if in your district, are there any townships that are urban townships? You might not know, I want to know. Okay, so I'm always aghast that township trustees don't have to file any ethics disclosures or financial disclosures, and so, I'm for if there's going to be disclosure, all these people, but at least I can get if there's a Dink Township with 2,000 people, but when you're dealing with a township like Union Township that, probably $100 million, millions and millions and millions of dollars is flowing through, it seems, and a lot of development, because as we know, one of the big risks is you get lower, just so people know, as you get lower like a township trustee, you have a lot of impact on development. But you don't have to do any financial disclosure, and there's no campaign finance limits. Like you have a campaign finance limit. And so I would ask, you can give me your reaction, but I think that all those should have to file. Maybe there's a cutoff, like urban townships versus non-urban. But, I'm for more disclosure. It sounds like you're for it, at least for village administrators.
Well, the revised code does treat counties on a variety of subjects differently depending on their population, and does require bigger counties to do additional things than
Okay.
smaller ones.
Well, I'd ask you to consider that township. I think in Union Township, for example, where we're also having, trustee races. I know it's not your district, but, trustee races that are $50,000, $60,000 races taking place. I have to guarantee you Batavia Village isn't having any races that are $50,000, $60,000. So there's big money going through there. One of the things, too, is I noticed is that I would encourage, but I want to get your take on it, is I know when you run from office, from my 3 unsuccessful runs for office, is that you have to file a financial disclosure just being a candidate. And I think there's like a $50 fee, but they're not online or anything. And I feel like it's just a money grab, like to make everybody, that funds the Ethics Commission. You never see them, they get buried. I could understand that either, I would ask you just to think about, I don't want to hit you with something, either you should have to file a financial disclosure when you're in office, or if it's other than when you're in office, those should be online so that somebody could go, the candidate running for office, they could go look them up. Right now, the only way, if I as a candidate filed one because I have to, then the only way somebody'd see it is by doing a record request for it, So has that ever crossed your mind, or where those reports go?
I usually just fill mine out and do mine and pay.
They're
my
not
fee.
rigorous. Would you agree with that? They're not particularly daunting reports.
Well, they do.
It's like, where is your 401k, not how much is your 401k. There's not a lot of questions about maybe JLAC is different. Maybe for a legislature, you have some different requirements. I'm talking about the one for.
We have to list all of our creditors. We have to list all our debtors.
But not the amounts.
And we also, I don't think on that part.
Yeah.
When it comes to income, you have to list a range that you
Okay.
exist within a certain.
Okay, and I know gifts, if you receive gifts, then I
Yeah,
think you have to
so on
put
there.
an amount.
That's right.
Okay, so I don't want to drag that out. The campaign finance, we're sitting here, we just had the Ohio Election Commission. I just interviewed Mr. Richter, the executive director. We had the Larry Householder thing. I have not watched the HBO thing. Have you watched the HBO
have.
thing? Okay, I have not. I wish
It's not really about Larry Household.
By the way, somebody was telling me about it. We're talking about basically that it was talking about Citizens United and stuff like this. And I support Citizens United, by the way. What Larry Householder did was a crime unrelated to Citizens United, because of the coordination. It's illegal to coordinate right now. And so I know liberals want to always get at Citizens United, and I haven't watched it. But I see HBO is probably liberal, so it's going to be about Citizens United. But the real issue is coordination of these things, But I took back and I asked Mr. Richter, it kind of strikes me that there has not been a single, that I know of, bill or effort or serious bill or effort for any campaign finance reform. And I'm totally against campaign finance reform that would be limits, things that Democrats tend to like, some limit, some this. I'm just for transparent reporting. And I think it's broken largely in Ohio right now. You guys the leadership is, I don't know if you count as this, trying to maybe get rid of the Election Commission, and go a different route as to how campaign finance would be enforced. But there hasn't been, as far as I know, any bill. There hasn't been any hearings. There hasn't been any of the come to Jesus on, in a post-Householder world, how are we going to clean it up? And I have my suspicions that's because what Larry Householder did happens all the time. He just did it at a volume of money that was so outrageous that it caught attention from other people. So on campaign finance reform, kind of what's your philosophy, or what do you think should happen, or with it, or, does it seem to you like it's odd that we haven't had any, I don't think we even repealed House Bill 6. So.
We absolutely.
Oh, did? Okay.
All parts of House Bill
Okay,
6.
my bad.
In fact, we just did that.
When did you do it?
Well, we repealed probably 95% of it in the last couple of years. And
Okay.
then we repealed the last vestiges of it, specifically the
Okay, so my bad.
coal-fired power plants from out of state. We've done that in the last month.
Okay.
And so you say we have not done anything with campaign finance. I would say that we have done some stuff with that. In fact, we've made sure that we don't allow green card holders or out-of-country folks to make donations to statewide campaigns or to.
Yeah, but I'm like, that has nothing to do with what Larry Householder was doing.
No, but
So
you
my
say
point
we've
is,
done nothing, and
okay,
I'm
but
pointing out we've
specific
done
to
a lot.
Larry, I mean, to me, that's window dressing. That's not the inherent issues.
It's not window dressing when you talk about all of the out-of-state and out-of-country money that flowed in here to try to do that.
Oh, I get that. I get you.
stuff. They accused us of.
I get you.
gerrymandering.
I get you. So, but I'm talking specifically about campaign finance relating to offices. You're hitting, and I agree. You're hitting on when people come in here trying to do these constitutional amendments and stuff like that, and money's coming from all over the world for these things. And that's right. You're right. But when it comes to campaign finance, people running for governor, this, that, the other thing, it strikes me as I was not a supporter of Blystone, but he paid a $138,000 fine here at the Election Commission. But Larry Householder's never really had any case at the Election Commission. And lieutenants of Larry Householder have never been. Do you think that there should be a push for some sort of campaign finance reform that gets at the heart of the issues, reporting and the coordination issues that Larry Householder was exploiting?
I'm always willing to look at what we can do to improve. And I think that what he did, obviously, court found to be criminal. I was personally the brunt of some of it, and I didn't really enjoy that, by the way. And so, I think we can always improve, and we call it the Ohio Revised Code for a reason. We
Revise it all the time.
We're revising.
So that, and just so anybody that might watch this knows, Adam was in a three-way race in 2020 with a heavily backed Householder candidate, Alan Freeman, who I brought here to the Election Commission and has an outstanding $50,000 fine that he's not paid. And it was Nick Owens, Mr. Byrd, Rep. Byrd, and Alan Freeman. And it was a close, very competitive race. You were the endorsed candidate for the Claremont GOP. I appreciate that you had a personal impact of all that was going on during that campaign, and the money coming in and the flow of money so is there any from that experience of going through that where you were heavily spent on, in that three-way race? Do you have any, like one or two things that you think would be your key reforms? I mean, you've had 5 years to think about it, I guess 4 years to think about it.
It's over, it's past. The voters decided, and, I actually think that what happened, the exorbitant amount of money that was spent actually backfired. And people in Claremont and Brown County
It did it for Gene Schmidt.
are hardworking, and they're intelligent, they're independent thinking, and when they see that kind of money being spent, that throws up a red flag, and they think, I don't know if I can believe in this.
So you don't have any specific reform that you would think should happen?
I think, yeah. Can we reform? Yes. Do I have an idea right now in front of you today? No.
So because I think your take that voters are smart and see through this stuff. I don't think that's the case, which is evident by the type of campaigning that gets done. The postal, I think you're a relatively deep guy and you could hang in a debate and stuff like that. But a lot of this campaign that's become the least common denominator, here's a mugshot of somebody, here's a this, here's a that, painting people, taking things out of context. I'm not saying that's illegal. I'm against, attempts by the government to have, speech police, type of thing.
Sure, the Supreme Court has ruled that. That's
you can't do
protection of
that.
speech.
But the reality is, I think that that voters get manipulated by this, and it's not. And I think there should be reform. Let me move on to taxes. You got Vivek, which I frankly don't understand how he's going to cut every tax in the state and how we're still going to fund things. I haven't figured that out. Property taxes is something people are really screaming about. And I personally despise property taxes. If I could control the world, I would increase income taxes and get rid of property taxes because income taxes are fairer. Is there I know a lot of people in Claremont County have been screaming and yelling about their property taxes out of control. It's affecting the ability of schools to raise levies that are relying on property tax. What's your thoughts on what do you think should be the tax strategy going forward in a cacophony right now where everybody's talking about we're going to get rid of all this, but it's not maybe rooted in where we're going to get the money from then?
I had a bill last General Assembly with Thomas Hall, and this bill would limit the increase of your property taxes. Because Claremont County was such a growing county, we had huge property valuation increases. We were trying to slow that down. And so now other counties around the state have felt that. And I don't personally like property taxes, but they are the only tax that stays within a county. Interestingly enough, a couple of nights ago was
The
election
sales
night.
tax component would stay within the county, or the plate fee would stay within the county.
And so, across the state of Ohio, two-thirds of school levy questions were approved by the voters. So when people complain about their property taxes and then two-thirds voted yes on it, it tells me that people really like their schools and they want to. They still want to make sure that their school is supported. But I will tell you that I have had some conversations with other members about, can we reduce people's property tax and replace it with a little bit higher sales tax? Because with a sales tax, you're now catching all people, whether it's tourism dollars, whether it's illegal immigrants that might be present in your community, they have to at least participate in the sales
Okay.
tax.
Well, I think that, I think it's a good conversation. I think that your property tax disproportionately affects homeowners, obviously, and retirees.
Yep.
And it's easy for people to vote to spend other people's money. If I'm an apartment dweller, it's easier for me to vote for somebody else to have to pay more of a tax. The sales tax is a regressive tax
That's what they say.
because poor people have to spend a higher. If I'm a multimillionaire, I spend a very low percentage of my income every year at retail per se. A poor person spends a very high percentage, so that disproportionately hits poor people. Income tax is typically a regressive tax where it goes down. It's like this percent on up to this much, and then you pay more as it goes up. I think right now tax fairness in Ohio, I think somebody should really take the politics out of it and look at tax fairness across the way we collect revenue. Like, why are we collecting everything through property tax? Libraries, social services, senior, it's just too much. So, okay, but are you support Vivek, right?
I have endorsed them.
You have endorsed him. And, he says he wants to get rid of the income tax. Do you support that?
Well, I think we need to take a look at it in the overall tax structure of Ohio. They're all kind of interconnected, because when you do give a homestead exemption to somebody in a county,
Yeah.
that property tax is just being paid by the state of Ohio now. And so we've got to be careful and look at it comprehensively.
Do you think that, it just crossed my mind, but people have told me, and you may or may not be aware of this, but one of the big issues with schools, and I know your experience as a superintendent, big issues with schools is that our property taxes levies are not indexed for inflation. And prior to the Carter era, they were. And so they would increase, and people don't know this, that, pass a levy, and you correct me, you would know more than I would. The levy's for $5 million, and it's not allowed to collect more than $5 million. So by definition, the value of the levies erodes over time, because the schools have to keep coming back. And whereas somebody told me in Kentucky, they are indexed for inflation. You drive in Kentucky, you don't see signs for renewals all the time. Do you feel like that's something that should get addressed in the law? Because it was actually a response to the stagflation of the Carter era to take away the indexing and to put that back in so that the schools aren't having to constantly come back and try to explain to somebody, no, the reality is we have to keep doing this because the levies we passed in the past are capped at an amount they can collect, and inflation eats away at that over time.
Well, I and some others, we're definitely interested in bringing in some out-of-state experts to talk to the General Assembly about how schools are, how we're providing them revenue. And I think we're all we all see that reform needs to be made in this area. Not sure what it's going to be yet, but I do think we need to look at it.
Okay. And then the last thing that I wanted to ask you about, and I appreciate the time you spent, is, it's kind of you have an unbelievable education background. I got okay grades in school, but that's my educational background. And I have a place in Florida, and I think Florida has 87 school districts for the whole state. So in Florida, you can have, I looked it up, I believe the law is one district per county. If a county has a city, like Tampa, I don't know if they actually do this, but you'd have Hillsborough County and the city could have a school district of its own. But then you have in Florida, multiple counties have joined together and be one district. That's why there's like 88 or 89 counties in Florida, but there's fewer school districts than counties because the rural areas have several counties have merged. We have, I think, and the numbers probably changed a little bit, but 611 school districts. Like there's that comes with it an amazing amount of superintendent level. Would you be, what's your reaction to that? Do you feel that's great that we have 611 school districts, or that at some point, we should pare that back and combine some of these things to get more efficiency in education?
I definitely think that we need to consolidate school districts.
Okay.
But nobody wants to do that. Nobody wants to be a part of that.
They're not going to raise their hand first.
They're going to want their local school that they grew up in, their parents grew up in, my kids are going to go. They don't want to see that. And plus, if you consolidate school districts, you now have to bus a kid to another school that's farther away. It busts up communities a little bit. But I do think that we're going to have to start doing these kinds of things.
Okay. What's interesting is I try to observe in Florida how it works, but I don't have, my kid went to school in Claremont County. And I think what's happened because they have so few, it's like almost like the schools have more of a role. The individual schools, like the county we have our condo in has, I think, 3 high schools that are different regions of the county. And they kind of operate more like they'd have a high school board or something like that, then it's caused it to be a little less centralized in the district on some of those things. Okay. So I think, on education, I know Vivek is the last thing I want to hit on, okay? On education, Vivek's talking a lot about, merit pay, this kind of thing. Have you ever read Freakonomics?
I have not read it. I've heard of it.
Sometime if I find one it's not an ethics violation, I'll give you a copy of the book. There's a couple chapters in there on education. It's very interesting about how merit pay in education oftentimes backfires, and it doesn't have the intended result, that people try to game it to get their merit pay. I'm not a believer that necessarily merit pay is the be-all. People look for these magic elixirs. Boom, it fixes it. If you had to say your background and in the legislature, you're in leadership now, you got booted off the education commission or education thing before.
Back on that.
But you're back on, okay. So I think a lot of people would say, regardless of good or bad districts, we have an overall systemic issue with, are we producing students that are competitive on the world stage? And there could be a lot of issues with that. It could be not school, it could be family issues. Is there some issues that you think are important with your background in Ohio? Vivek says merit pay, that you think would be the key 3 or 4 things to get education delivering higher quality product at the end?
I'll give you 2.
Okay.
Number 1, I have a bill to restore instructional hours that were lost in 2014.
Okay.
The General Assembly decided to reduce the school year in hours, and so my bill seeks to restore those, and I think quality time matters. Number 2 is the way we test our kids. We're testing our kids based on Ohio-approved curriculum. But that's not what we use when we compare Ohio to other states and other nations. We use a test called the NAEP test. We don't use that. We don't test that, and we only give it to a couple of kids randomly selected.
To come up with our scores, basically?
To come up with Ohio scores.
Yeah.
They're randomly selected, a very, very small part of them, and that's reflective of how Ohio is performing to other schools around the nation and around the world. And if that's going to be the comparison, then we ought to start giving the NAEP to every kid and use that as the regular test that we test our kids by.
Do you think, we just had in my district, not yours, West Claremont's levy and income tax got totally destroyed. I'm actually a proponent of schools moving towards income tax funding because I think it's fairer than property tax funding. Do you have a perspective on school funding? And would you, if it ever came up the idea, that we should add a point to the income tax to fund schools and use that as a means to reduce property tax, would you be supportive of an idea like that? How do you feel income tax versus property tax
What
should
I'm
relate?
supportive of is bringing in outside experts from other places around the nation. We brought in the National Conference for State Legislatures today for another committee to talk to us about another issue and a way it's being handled around the nation. I think we need to bring in other people. Tell us how it's happening, how it's working in other places where it's successful. And what we've got going on in Ohio right now is frustrating to a lot of people, and it probably needs to be changed.
Do you support a backpack bill model?
Well, I mean, we have school vouchers right now in Ohio, and we've had them.
I'm
for
saying
several years.
universal backpack bill.
I want to see how other states are doing it.
Okay.
And so, I think we need to learn from successful states and how we fund our schools.
I'll close with this and then see if there's anything you want to talk about. I watch YouTube videos, and when you watch it on the TV, just the next one starts playing. And it was a John Stossel thing talking to, I think, the Prime Minister of Sweden about, Sweden's not really socialist, and how does it work? All of their schools, I was shocked, all of their schools are run by private companies in Sweden so that they can then evaluate how well the companies are performing and they can replace a company. They have like 3 or 4 companies that are basically competing for the contracts to run different schools, and they're based on merit and results. That's compared to our world of United States view of education, that would be way out here. But I
The
thought
Ohio Constitution.
I thought it was very interesting, but I don't think the Ohio Constitution would preclude it being the individual schools being run by private companies.
Well,
The
we certainly
state would
allow
need to
that.
provide it, but
We have chartered schools and
Yeah.
non-chartered schools in the state of Ohio, and so but it is important that Ohio provide what the Constitution requires, which is adequate schools and adequate funding, and make sure that we're producing a workforce that's ready for business.
So in closing, there's one question I forgot to ask about the incentives. And I'm aware of, I think Batavia Township, I think the project name is The Meadows, which is a subsidized housing, workforce housing project, where people would be getting, I guess, government vouchers to pay. CRAs are not that. Have you been engaged at all with any concerns over that kind of housing? I think historically people called it Section 8 housing. I don't know that that's an accurate term for it today. I think it's called workforce housing now.
I couldn't speak intelligently.
Okay. Well, I appreciate. Is there anything else you wanted to hit on or talk
Nope.
about? Hey, I appreciate it. I hopefully it wasn't too painful talking to me. So
Part of the job.